you?
Really well.
Awesome.
Really well.
Good afternoon. Welcome, Tony Burke. So I'm the representative for Video newspaper. Your view always suggests a strong encouragement of the immigrants' integration into the society of Australia. What do you think, in your view, that immigration has contributed towards the development of Australian society?
Look, we have two sorts of Australian stories here. There's 24 million of us, and everybody's story either starts here on this land all the way back to the first sunrise, or at some point in time, it's an immigration story. So for my background, my family coming from Ireland a couple of hundred years ago, it's an immigration story. But every story is as Australian as the other. My story is no more Australian than yours. And I think often we undervalue that, and we forget that a true multicultural country isn't one where we just say, okay, if you're of a different background, just go over and celebrate in the corner and we'll give you space to do that. To really make it work, we share our stories and we share our celebrations. So I'm often on my feet in Parliament talking about different celebrations or special days for people that have nothing to do with my tradition, but because they're for communities that live here in Australia, they're part of Australia's story now as well. And that's really what I want people to get that sense of pride with, that it's not simply be proud of your own culture, it's share it. Explain to your neighbour, explain to your friends, invite people to be part of it. And out of that, we end up with the very best of modern Australia.
And so you strongly believe that immigration also play a very important role for the building block of Australia as a whole?
I do. Immigration, unless your heritage is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, then your story is an immigration story. Yeah, modern Australia is those two sorts of stories intertwined. And yeah, I get really frustrated when people have a view sometimes that now that their family's here, they want to close the door behind them.
Sure, yeah.
And that's not what we're about, and we're a more generous and decent country than that.
Thank you. And so we do strongly think as well that Australia really needs skilled immigrants who can bring with them their talents and also their capital resource into Australia to contribute to the countries. So do you think that the current immigration scheme and policy, do you think they appropriately address the current needs of Australia, or do you think that there's something that needs to be changed in certain areas?
Yeah, look, the needs will always change over time, and we need to be constantly adapting to make sure that the immigration policy meets the needs of Australia. For example, we can say for a time, yep, what we need are highly skilled people to come here, and that's true. But once they're here, then they will want the people they love to be with them as well. Yeah. People often act as though there's a choice between skilled migration and family migration, and I think, if we're welcoming skilled immigrants as complete people, then it really needs to be with eyes wide open. That part of that decision will be a decision that, normal checks and all of that have to happen, but that ultimately welcomes members of their family as well.
Thank you. And so what kind of support do you think the Australian government needs to do in order to allow skilled immigrants to demonstrate their full capability in Australia when they first came?
I think the bigger problem at the moment is some people, even though the system is meant to bring people in because we need their skill, sometimes people are brought in by some unscrupulous employers for all the wrong reasons. And they can be subjected to terrible exploitation. And at the same time, they can feel sometimes that they mustn't complain, because if they do complain, the boss can effectively cancel their visa by cancelling their job.
So your suggestion is to basically provide more education to the immigrant when they first came here?
The education level there matters. You need to have people checking that it's working on the ground the way it was meant to work on paper. What I never want to see again is what we saw with 7-Eleven a couple of years ago, where you just watching the video footage of people going to the ATM, taking out cash and handing it to their boss. Yeah, it's meant to be the other way around. And yet that was their experience of working in Australia. So I think there's ways of making sure that skilled migration meets the needs of the nation without making it a bad experience for the immigrant themselves.
Thank you. So attaining citizenship of Australia is a great honour and a privilege for many immigrants, including myself. As you may know, the Australian government has once attempted to raise the bar to make it a little bit tougher for immigrants to obtain citizenship, especially for older generation or the working class people due to their limited English ability. So do you think such difficulty is necessary, or should we encourage immigrants to obtain citizenship instead of making it harder for them?
I want us to help people learn English when they're here. Their experience of Australia will be better if they have better English. But when the Liberal Party said, unless you have university level English, you don't belong, I just found that extraordinary. I mean, think of the number of people we all know, who have made a great contribution to Australia. We're lucky to have them here, have built strong families, and who never had university level English. I mean, effectively the government was saying to those people, they'd really rather that they weren't here. Now, I don't think that was just a mean thing to do. I think that devalued who we are as a country. Yeah, lots of countries in the world do have a system where you have an underclass of non-citizens living there. There's lots of countries where there are people working in very low-paid situations where they're never allowed to be citizens and they go through their working life in that country. We haven't been like that. And I don't want that to change. I want us to be a country where if someone moves here, then there's a presumption that after a limited period of time, they will be invited to stay. They will make a pledge of commitment to Australia, and we'll say back to them, welcome home. Now, I want to get back to the time when that is the view of both sides of politics, but no one should be in any doubt. The Liberal Party right now believes in toughening the English language test to prevent people from becoming Australian citizens. And they want to do it, I have to say, in a way that goes along racial lines. You have to pass the English language test if you come from Singapore or India or Vietnam. You don't have to pass it if you come from New Zealand, Canada, the United States, Ireland or the UK. There's lots of people in countries like India or Singapore, for example, who speak English their entire lives as a first official language. And yet they would have to have university level English, but if you come from England, you don't. Now, they try that again, I'll fight that again.
Thank you. Now, moving on to another question, and this is also the issue that most people are concerned about, a burning question that they want to know, sponsoring parents to Australia. Now, recently, Australian government has tried to make it more difficult to sponsor parents by raising the income requirements. Now, this has sparked a dramatic stress and disappointment among immigrants, especially for those who have waited in the queue for a long time. Fortunately, the change has been reversed now, but what remains is the worries that when such consideration has been made by the government once, it might happen again in the future when the time is right, when they gather enough opinions. Do you think this is the correct approach from the government in order to maintain Australian living standard and the welfare of our own citizens?
There's a pattern here.
Yeah.
There's a really clear pattern. Every time the government makes a change in these areas or the different areas that you and I have been talking about during this interview, the direction of the change is always the same. It's always about being less welcoming to new immigrants to Australia. That's what this government's chosen to do. And I've got to tell you, when Malcolm Turnbull became their leader, I thought it'd be different. I thought there'd be a bit more unity in the nation. Yeah. But the citizenship test, that was proposed under Malcolm Turnbull, not Tony Abbott. That under Malcolm Turnbull, every time we get an immigration announcement, it gets tougher and it becomes a way of excluding people from Australia. Now, there can be a whole lot of reasons why people do get excluded, security checks and things like that, and I agree with those sorts of reasons. But income? And to shift the income from $45,000 to $115,000 without an announcement, without the government letting people know what was going on, they just did it. Well, we fought it, and and they eventually backed down. Will they try something like that again? I think they will, because the pattern is so strong. So my sense is, I hope at the next, there's a lot of things I hope for at the next election, but one of the things I really hope happens is that communities send a really loud message to the Liberal Party that they won't put up with this. Because the Liberal Party's only doing it because they think they can get away with it, and they think communities won't react. I hope they get a really loud message that communities won't put up with this, because if the Liberal Party stops behaving this way and we can get back to multicultural policy being something that the two sides of politics agree on, we'll be a better country for it.
Thank you. So with the new income requirement, I'm pretty sure there's a lot, maybe 80% of immigrants who freshly just got their PR won't be able to meet, which means that they will never be able to unite with their parents in Australia. So your suggestion is that as a community, we should definitely right now to raise our voice to fight,
absolutely.
To fight out the matter, because you strongly believe that will happen again in the near future when the time is right.
Because at the moment, every time we win on something, they come back with something else.
Correct, yeah.
We won on the citizenship to university English test, but then they came back with assurances of support. They backed down for the time being on assurances of support, but they'll come back with something else. And what needs to happen is we need to be saying to them loudly, no more. We're all Australian. Stop behaving this way and start welcoming people again.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
No, fantastic. And thank you for travelling out to Punchbowl to be with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.